every country is doing the fiat game, maybe there's like not an imbalance between the countries because like everyone plays the same game. But as soon as one country starts to adopt Bitcoin, this country will start to get ahead and will start to accumulate a lot more wealth over time. And that's basically what we've seen in 2021 with El Salvador. How do you look at the debt problem when kind of the argument is, and I get that actually from some people, but doesn't everyone do the fiat game because everyone does it? Is it now good? And how do you look at when all of a sudden countries like El Salvador or Bhutan, maybe also America in the future, a little bit more aggressive, not just declaring the Bitcoin that they have as a strategic reserve, but actually buying also some. How do you look at that picture?
Really good question, man. It reminds me of the book, The Sovereign Individual. There's a passage in that book. I'm going to just paraphrase it, but they basically say that, governments no longer respect us. They basically treat us like cows in the pasture waiting to be milked. So when everyone is doing this fiat printing game and everyone is a prisoner to that monetary monopoly, you can have a lot of hubris as the money printer or as the authority. You can really kind of abuse those people because in your eyes there was no escape. So if there's no way to escape the plantation, you can whip the workers as many times a day as you want to. Well, their problem was, and I think what they're coming to realize now is, Bitcoin is that escape. It's as if one of those cows found a breach in the fence and they're freeing themselves. And now everyone realizes that every time a cow pushes through there, that breach is getting a little wider and is getting noticed by more of the herd. And no one's just going to sit in there if there is an escape from that situation. They're not just going to sit there and allow themselves to just continuously be milked. So I think it was a situation where no one really believed or was paying enough attention. Maybe El Salvador was just one cow leaving, and then maybe Bhutan is two cows leaving. And then, suddenly you're starting to realize it was like, everyone's leaving, like there's no way, we can't repair the fence. We can't keep them in here anymore. There is an escape hatch, particularly being Bitcoin, where you can't just go mend the fence. Like Bitcoin's not something you can just go shut down or stop or, so I think they're starting to understand that. And I think we almost jumped the shark on it where I believe that the world was considering trying to box it in. They were considering trying to see what they could do, hopefully do some international coordination between central banks, between, large nation states, and try to put a cap on this thing, or just be like, hey, okay, we'll allow it to maybe be an asset, but it's definitely not going to be money. They're like playing those kind of games and just seeing what they could get away with. I think now you're seeing the people that are the most well educated about it, I think they're starting to understand and starting to advocate. It was like, you cannot stop this thing. And if you cannot stop it, it becomes kind of like the Saifedean idea of gunpowder. Like if you cannot stop it, you get put in the join or die position. So I think we're getting to the point here that I know even in our first conversation, we talked about how I was hoping Bitcoin would make America, force them to be more American again. And I think in some ways it's exactly what it's doing. I think they realize they cannot stop it. And they're starting to understand the game theory math of this all, where if you cannot stop it, you almost have to be first. So I always wanted America to be first. I thought that Bitcoin was kind of codified American values. If you just think of life, liberty, property, like Bitcoin just is those things. It's inherently American, I think. And I'm not to say that freedom only exists in America, but the way we have our founding documents laid out, Bitcoin perfectly aligns with it in a codified, immutable way. So I always wanted us to go first, thought we should go first, but thought we would not go first because we've enjoyed this exorbitant privilege of having the reserve currency for decades and decades, which allows us to steal from the entire world and make our standard of living better. So no one's just going to give that up kind of voluntarily. But I think the power of Bitcoin is it's kind of signaled that it's here to stay. People are starting to notice that. And if that's going to be the reality, if you don't go first, you're last. It's like, if you don't go first, you're bored in Southwest with C-74 on your pass, and you're going to get the shittiest seat on the plane. So I think that's what the U.S. is starting to realize. And I think now that they've signaled from the very top with the whole SPR idea, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve idea, now that they've signaled that, I know people were a little bit disappointed by it because it was like, oh, they didn't come out and just say, we're buying $100 billion of this thing. But I think if you have trust in that game theory, you know that's coming next, because once they started the gun and started the race, you have no choice but to race. So I think people will be surprised of the size and just how quickly this comes together, because I think the people driving that part of the agenda do understand that only one nation is going to be able to carve out a dominant position in this new monetary network, and they want to be that person, and they're going to figure that part out. So I think it's going to happen faster than people think. So if you were disappointed on, on game day, just wait a few months, and I think you'll be surprised at how much progress is made.
Yeah, the idea that Robert Kennedy Jr., I think, brought up with accumulating 20 or 25% of the Bitcoin supply. I think it was 4 million Bitcoin, which he shouted out, which is for me an absurd big amount. And I'm not even sure how fast they could get there and what would happen with Bitcoin if they actually had that goal of accumulating so many.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to see and play out in real time this year, next year, the next 10 years, how the US is now starting from, hey, let's do those 200,000 Bitcoin that we have and name it strategic Bitcoin reserve. How do we go from here to maybe having 500,000 or 1 million Bitcoin? Because they should at least have more than MicroStrategy, I guess.
Yeah.
A US company should not have more than US itself. I mean, I'm a big believer that citizens and the private companies should have more, but in their eyes, they should. They don't want to be lower than a company. So it will be really fun to see how this all shakes out. How do you actually look at those things, and also Doge and Trump and the Bitcoin strategy and what's going on currently?
Yeah, I mean, very interesting, very big idea. I think what's interesting about strategy is kind of proven at the corporation level that if you're a first mover, you can basically build a lead that is insurmountable. And I think I don't think that signal's been lost at the nation state level of game theory, of just like strategy is going to be the one corporation that can get to probably 500,000 Bitcoin. There's really nobody else out there that'll probably be able to catch them at that point. They've already established that dominant position on the corporation level. I think whoever moves first in size, it's not that El Salvador doesn't matter, but they're a small country. Bhutan's a small country. Whichever large kind of G7 power country moves in size first is going to do the same thing strategy did on the corporate level. They're going to make an insurmountable lead at the nation state level. They're going to be the network leader. They're going to have all the leverage. So someone's going to realize that and kind of figure that out. And I hope it's going to be us. Looks like it very well could be us. And I think all the other things happening at the nation state level are kind of indicative of that goal, and that hopefully we're going to be able to move fast enough to establish that dominant position. The way I look at the strategic Bitcoin reserve and Doge and all of these things, I think it's a combination of both of those things. So it's the impossible fiscal position that the United States realizes it's in. We've just over the last few years watched our deficit go from 1 trillion to 2 trillion. Now we're at a burn rate of 2.8 trillion. We realize we can't escape that math now. So I think all the people in the know are like, okay, well, what comes next? If you believe Howard Lutnick, who's our new commerce secretary, the whole kind of idea was we're running a $2 trillion deficit. I need Doge and Elon to go find me $1 trillion of cuts. I need to go find $1 trillion of revenue. That brings us down to just a balanced budget at that point. And then we can, start doing tax cuts and other things that they want to accomplish. I think that's very ambitious. I will say I've been somewhat surprised at just how I knew my government was wasteful, but I've been very surprised just how much waste Doge has been able to find in just turning over the first couple of couch cushions. You're just like, holy crap. This is a much worse situation than I thought it was. But the good part about that is maybe they're going to be able to find far more government cuts than was necessarily initially anticipated. But it's still an ambitious goal, only because if you break down the numbers of like the United States budget easily, we spend about 7 trillion a year. We bring in roughly 5 trillion a year, but that 5 trillion is completely spent through budget or interest on the national debt. That's about $1 trillion a year. Military in the United States is just under $1 trillion a year. Medicare and Social Security are just about 1.5 trillion apiece. So there's your 5 trillion right there. That's all the money you take in, just those 4 things, those 4 programs. So if you want to try to balance the budget, at least conceptually, if you can't find a ton of waste inside those other budget items that bring that number down, you have to get rid of the entire government. And even if you got rid of the entire government, every single agency, every single employee, every single thing, every single building, you still are basically running a deficit at that point. So I just don't think everyone realizes the gravity of just how bad that fiscal position has gotten. So I think these guys are taking some pretty gross input, egregious moves right out of the gates, and it's making people here a lot of nervous. You know, like they're cutting entire agencies, they're laying off thousands of people, they're putting tariffs on the whole world, and it all seems like, oh, whoa, like this is too much. It's too much too fast. And I think in some ways they're kind of following the Javier Milei model in Argentina, where you just kind of come in and just afuera, just start ripping band-aids off and just reset and just kind of rebuild in the way you want to rebuild. But I just don't think that it seems like too much. If I was gonna, as a pilot, if I was gonna make an airplane analogy here, when you're flying an airplane, you never want to make gross control inputs, because you can put the aircraft in an unstable position, you can stall it out, you can go over its maneuvering speed, do structural damage to an aircraft. That being said, if you're flying towards a mountain and your only choice is to make gross control inputs or hit that mountain, then all deals are off. Then you're willing to stress the airframe a little bit. You're willing to kind of like put a gross control input just to stay alive. So it's kind of interesting where people say like, people find Bitcoin when they need Bitcoin. And it's not really the privileged people that find it first. It's usually someone that has a real need to find it. I think you can argue now that we're starting to recognize that the United States, although it is the world's superpower and it's had the reserve currency, they're starting to run that budget debt math, and they're starting to realize that it's like, for them, Bitcoin is not a nice to have. Bitcoin is a need to have. So you bring up like RFK and this very ambitious goal of basically trying to match our gold reserves with Bitcoin. So we have like whatever 5% of the world's gold. Let's have 5% of the world's Bitcoin. I think when I think of RFK, I think of his uncle, late President JFK, that was assassinated. He used to say, "Ask not what your country can do for you; ask what you can do for your country." And I think if we think about that in Bitcoin terms, that's where we're at with Bitcoin. It's not what my country can do for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to be fine. I could give a crap if my country actually gets a Bitcoin reserve or starts buying it, but my country needs a Bitcoin. So it's what can Bitcoin do for my country? Because I think it's the only way that I see, and I think it's the only proposal that's been put out there that actually gives us a path to crawl out of this hole that we've built. So, there's Cynthia Loomis and Michael Saylor. They've been doing this kind of math of, if we're able to buy Bitcoin now and we actually, are able to pass this through Congress and get an actual Bitcoin reserve that we start to fund over the next 5 years, you can actually see, and then there's a 20-year lockup where we lock up that Bitcoin, we allow it to accrue value density, and then hopefully use that only to pay off the debt in 20 years. So where we pulled the whole future forward and spent all of our kids' future right out from under their legs, now this allows us to lock up, get that first mover advantage. Just like everybody in Bitcoin knows, if you're in early, everyone that comes later floats you. So I think that's what they're going to try to do at the nation state level. And it's really the only way you can get out of an impossible fiscal position, because we're not going to be able to grow our way out of it. We're not going to be able to do all these things because with the Jeff Booth idea of productivity, and we know that AI is coming and robotics are coming, and it's going to be this very deflationary economy that's in a vacuum going to accrue a lot of purchasing power to the dollar because it's going to become so much more efficient. But when you're that debt laden, you can't afford any purchasing power to accrue to your currency, because the whole thing was kind of built on this way that no one can escape, and we're going to be able to Ponzi this thing down. So you can't allow for purchasing power because you're already in an insolvent fiscal position, and every ounce of purchasing power that goes into your currency now makes all of your debt harder to pay in real terms. So they haven't been able to allow that. They're not going to allow that. And they're going to start pulling on both sides of this rubber band where technology is going to try to force prices to the floor. And since you can't allow that to happen, you have to just continue to print. So I think they saw this dynamic where we're really in trouble here. Like, this technology is going to accelerate efficiency, But as a government being insolvent, we're going to have to print and steal all that productivity for ourselves. And the government's just going to continue to grow until it just snuffs out everything, until it just strangles the goose. So I think the people, and if you, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he, before the election, he had an interview where he was basically saying, within the next 4 or 5 years, the United States is going to need some kind of monetary reset, some kind of Bretton Woods 2.0. So he kind of saw it, and now they handed him the reins to Treasury. He's kind of running that money game from the inside. So I think he understands that. I think they all kind of get it, and it's this idea of, we cannot keep doing what we're doing. If we do that, we're going to fly this plane straight into the mountain. We have to do something, and we have to do something of size. We're kind of past the point where small tweaks will actually fix this problem. So I don't know. I'm not on the inside. I'm not working on this administration or anything like that. But I think their ultimate goal is to go back to a world where tariffs were the revenue stream, and that income tax was a very small part of the equation. So back in the late 19th century in America, called like the Gilded Age here, like 1870 to 1900, or even Trump himself, which is also probably kind of a little breadcrumb. He constantly is saying that the most prosperous time in America was from 1870 to 1913. He always uses 1913 as like the ending point, which is only interesting because that's the year that we got an income tax, and that's the year that the Fed was created. So for the whole kind of Gilded Age in America, we ran off tariff revenue. And this isn't like an endorsement of like, hey, this current administration, what they're doing. It's just, this is what I think is their frame of mind is, I want to go back to that place. That was one of the most prosperous economic times in American history. And we didn't have an income tax, and we ran everything off of tariffs. So I think what changed that regime was, and the thing that 1913 wasn't necessarily a coincidence, the whole world's kind of a industrial base got smoked during World War I. So once once Europe is devastated by World War I, it's hard to run things off of tariffs, because all the people that were paying the tariffs and making the goods that you were tariffing in the first place, they all just got completely decimated by war. So the idea was, we'll move away from this tariff model because it doesn't make sense of the current geopolitical climate. Will allow Europe to rebuild, and then we'll, in the meantime, we'll put this income tax in place. That'll become the revenue stream temporarily, or whatever it would be. And it was only supposed to be a small tax on the very top earners, the top 1% to 3% of income earners in the US. Fast forward now, 100 years, they never revisited that. They never went back to tariffs. They left the income tax in place, and it grew to the point where, you ever hear like Tax Freedom Day? It's this idea of like, this is the day that you stop working for the government and actually work for yourself. And it's somewhere like mid-April. I think it's like April 9th or something like that. So every single thing you do between January 1st and April 9th is just paying for your government. Like you're not enjoying any of that productivity yourself. So I know it's like more than a quarter of the whole year. You're just working for the government and not yourself. So I think the idea is, the math is broken. The system's broken. Here's our opportunity. We're just going to flip the board over, let all the pieces fall, and then rebuild as we may. So I think there's a much larger plan at play here, where they're willing to forego a little short-term pain with the idea that it was like, hey, we're not finessing the edges here. This thing is doomed. We have to reset the math. And whether that ends up resetting to a Bitcoin standard with that Bitcoin reserve kind of at the base layer of that, I imagine it probably is some combination of that, Bitcoin reserve on one side, and then basically forcing stable coins on the entire world as a way to have a new kind of forced treasury buyer. Because I don't know if you noticed, Tether became the 6th largest buyer of US treasuries last year. So I think at a time where we've taken all these geopolitical steps to, confiscate Russia's treasuries, and now all of our adversaries don't really want treasuries anymore because they're no longer neutral. We kind of reneged on that idea that they're neutral. It was like, well, it's a perfect safe reserve asset as long as you do what we say. If you don't, then we'll just take it from you. So everybody got that signal. So there's not as many foreign buyers of our treasuries. everyone in America, with the fact that, I know they kind of forced the CPI down. They first, like the consumer price index, they manipulate that number down. But everyone's starting to realize that if I'm holding a treasury at 4%, I'm getting negative real yield. I'm holding a negative real yielding asset because the actual true money printing is probably 8-10%, something like that. I mean, the M2 money supply expansion is about 8%. So they realize they're bleeding out. So then it's just a matter of like, no one really wants the treasuries, but the one treasury demand that is growing is this stable coin. So if we can kind of force stable coins on the whole world, because they want dollars anyway. Usually when you travel, people want to get their hands on dollars. And now that we can give them access through tech, it's like, fine, give them dollars. And then we'll just force the stable coin issuers to become the treasury buyers that we lost doing all the other things. So I think it's a combination of those things. I think it's that strategic Bitcoin reserve for us, stable coins for you.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.